First of all, let me just start by saying our guest today is somebody who can fill this room without the promise of food, which I think underscores just how excited we all are to be here. I should also start by saying, well, first of all, my name's Andrew Murtha. I'm the George and Sadie Hyman Professor of China Studies here at Johns Hopkins SAIS. This is the first China forum that we've had since before COVID. The China forums were part of the SAIS China Studies program, which lasted until 2020 when SAIS moved to a different organizational structure. And one of the things that I've endeavored to do since then is to beef up all of the things that maybe we hadn't done prior to COVID, while maintaining some continuity with some of the things that I think we did best. And I think one of the things that we did best, and I have a roster going back to the mid-1980s, is having the best and the brightest in the field of China studies come and share their views with us, the larger SAIS community. And today it's very exciting to me for a number of reasons, but one of which is that we get to continue this storied tradition, which is something that I'm very proud of and very proud to share with all of you. So, before I introduce today's speaker, I'd like to thank all of the people who made today possible. These include, but are not limited to, Beth Wooten, Lexi Jaramillo, Joran Li, all the people at SAIS Events and at SAIS IT for making this possible. The format of today's event is a discussion. The two of us will have a fireside chat, minus the fire, for as long as seems natural and appropriate, and then we want to so no more than half of the allotted time, and then I'd also like to open up the floor for Q&A with our guest, because there's so many of you here, and this is one of the benefits of having such an intimate setting. Just so you know, our guest had a virtual session earlier today that had 800 people. And how many do you have for the National Committee? How many was that? A couple thousand. So you are really, I think, in a wonderful situation to be in this intimate setting of only 100 seats. Let me give my introduction then. So whether we use the term China's totalitarian turn or Jeremy Wallace's more anodyne but useful China's new normal, the past decade or so has culminated in the need for us to really update our analytical lens for studying Chinese politics. Long-standing assumptions, expectations, and descriptors have not aged terribly well, while others, more hidden ones, may actually be more durable than meets the eye in an increasingly opaque People's Republic. Up until fairly recently, we took things like access to individuals, materials, and other data sources for granted. Today, we find ourselves searching for innovative approaches to do more with less, while others of us are scrambling to learn from older generations of Pekingologists whose approaches, skill sets, and insights have only become more relevant and useful with the passage of time. It is rare indeed to find an elite politics scholar of equal stature with those giants on whose shoulders we stand. My guest, Cheng Li, is one of those very rare few. But his extraordinary story doesn't begin or end there. Dr. Li grew up in Shanghai during the Cultural Revolution and was even a barefoot doctor during that time. He graduated from East China Normal University and then in 1985 came to the United States for graduate studies at the University of California, Berkeley, where he studied under Robert Scalapino and was mentored by none other than A. Doak Barnett, the founder of the China Studies program here at SAIS. And also the advisor to my advisor. So it's all part of a kind of a wicked web. And then he eventually received his PhD from Princeton. From 1991 to 2006, Dr. Li joined the faculty of Hamilton College, where he was eventually the William R. Kennan Professor of Government and Chair of the Asian Studies Program. In 2006, he joined the Brookings Institution, where he is Director of Research and Senior Fellow at the John L. Thornton China Center in the Foreign Policy Program. I'm just checking to see if there's any other accolades that you've received since Dr. Li has advised a wide range of government, business, and nonprofit organizations on working in China, too many, in fact, for me to list here. He is a tireless public intellectual. He is also the author of not only an extraordinary number of books on China, he has also exhibited the kind of topic range that few, if any, can match. Moreover, he is anything but a dilettante. His analyses, regardless of topic, are uniformly insightful, extraordinarily well-sourced, and are topical as well as durable, something that very few can pull off. He's written about elite politics, including books such as Chinese Politics in the Xi Jinping Era, Reassessing Collective Leadership, which I have here, The Road to Zhongnanhai, High-Level Leadership Groups on the Eve of the 18th Party Congress, China's Leaders, the New Generation, and Rediscovering China, Dynamics and Dilemmas of Reform. He's also written on politico-demographic change, middle-class Shanghai reshaping U.S.-China engagement, China's emerging middle class beyond economic transformation, of which he was an editor, and China's changing political landscape prospects for democracy. He's also written on U.S.-China relations, including Bridging Minds Across the Pacific, the Sino-U.S. Educational Exchange, 1978 to 2003, and China's Political Development, Chinese and American Perspectives, of which he was co-author. And finally, he's also written about bureaucracy and institutions, something that's close to my heart. These include the political mapping of China's tobacco industry and the anti-smoking campaign, which contains one of the most moving prefaces that I have ever read in a scholarly work and remains one of my favorite books on Chinese bureaucracy. He is also the principal editor of the Thornton Center Chinese Thinkers series published by Brookings Institution Press, and I barely scratched the surface. One of the privileges of sitting where I sit today is the ability to rub shoulders with people like Cheng Li. Actually, there is nobody like Cheng Li. We're therefore extremely lucky to host you here today.
Wow. Andy, thank you so much for this long and over generous introduction. And I wish my mother were here. She would believe every word you said about me. But it is wonderful to be here in the Johns Hopkins for a number of reasons. One is that, as probably you know, that both Andy and myself taught in liberal arts college. I was at the Hamilton College for 15 years. You were at the Cornell, very nearby. And so again, for me, it's really wonderful, like, to come back to the this kind of educational setting, and see also wonderful to see so many friends, former colleagues, and also former interns. Thank you for coming. Now, in your introduction, you mentioned two of your mentors. Also study under, my mentor. But actually, all these three people are also my mentors. This is Doug Burnett, Michael Ausenberg, and Ken Libersol. Ken Libersol is still with Brookings. And all these three people play very, very important role in various administrations in the White House and the senior director on China and or on Asia. I remember that in Doug Burnett Memorial Service, actually, by the way, Doug Burnett both work at the Johns Hopkins as the director of China Center, but also at the Brookings as a senior fellow. I remember in his memorial service, which I attended, Ken Libersol, my friend and mentor, told a story. This is the 1960s at the Columbia, and Ken Libersol finishing his, is going to start his PhD studies and writing about thesis, he told Doug Burnett that he wants to switch from Russian study to Chinese studies. Then Doug Burnett said, that's great. So let's have a lunch together. So he took him to a Chinese restaurant, then asked Ken Liversaw that, what do you think of the this Chinese restaurant? Then Ken said, to be honest, this is the first time I have been in a Chinese restaurant. There's a silence of several minutes. Then Doug said, Ken, I think you should return to Russian studies, not Asian study. I mean, this is a story I remember forever. When you study a country, you should also study the country's culture because it's so important. So I'm so grateful for your really very long and overly exaggerated the account. And to be honest, I'm inspired by your work, by your study of bureaucracy, along with your two mentors. Without them, I will not be here to study about the elite politics. Actually, first of my studies, and a number of books, including this one that you review, right? And actually, that's very much influenced by your writing about Chinese bureaucracy and also Chinese elite studies. So it's really wonderful to have you. I'm so happy that we will conduct as a conversation as I can learn more about your analysis about the Party Congress.
Well, thank you very much. I'll jump into my first question, but I should say I thought this was a double-blind process. So
okay. Well, but anyway, I can find out the leading scholar, who is the leading scholar in that area. So early on, yes, it was later on I found out who wrote the review. Yeah.
Anyway, kidding aside, let me, if I can, let me start
Sure.
broadly. And these are questions that I was curious about, but also I hope would also pique the interest or reflect the interest of other people that I've had conversations with. And I should preface by saying that my focus on institutions and structures and processes does not privilege actual individuals. So I'm as much a student as anybody else in this room. So what I'd really benefit from is just setting out the context, the general context. So it's funny, we were together at a conference at Harvard the week before the Party Congress, and now here we are, and you've done a lot more miles since then than I have. But I remember you had some at the beginning, or when we met in Cambridge, you remarked that this was a virtually leak-proof prelude into the Congress. I mean, there was just very little information that was getting out, and so I didn't have the chance to ask you this then, or for you to really be able to muse on it. But what's your overall interpretation, kind of in general, broad brushstrokes, of the 20th Party Congress, with a further comment on some of the stories and rumors circulating in their wake that we can either dispense with or that we might need to take a little bit more seriously? So how might we cut through the noise and get to the signals?
Well, first of all, this Party Congress, as I said, predicted early on, it's very difficult to figure out the composition because previous norms and the rules are abolished or not fully implemented at a very high level. Now, you're right that at Harvard and also in my conversation with Tom Friedman, and I think it's about 6 weeks ago, or 5-6 weeks ago, I said it's remarkable this time there's no leak. But actually, within a week, it's about announcement. I believe there was a leak just within a week. But the problem, actually, Wall Street Journal also got a story and got 6 out of 7 people right. But some of my contacts also later told me that they also got a kind of a version, actually 7 people all right. Now, but the point is, when you read this leak, I mean, how could you believe that this kind of line up? First, Li Keqiang and Wang Yang out, although I believe this will be the case. But I do not believe the other things. Li Keqiang will be the ranked number one, will become a premier. Then Hu Chenhua will be completely out. And the Ding Xuexiang has no economic experience, will serve as a deputy, or executive vice premier. How could anyone have any knowledge of Chinese elite politics will believe that version? So I think that people like myself, work in this area for a long time, will be immediately describe these kind of things. Why? Because we preoccupied our own wishful thinking, our version, our previous knowledge. So there's a possibility. Again, I cannot say 100% for sure. Maybe I also received somewhere, but I just completely cannot believe it. They just discredit immediately. Not even think that's the case at all. Right? Just for a reason. I can tell you more of this reason in this 7 people composition. Right? So that's actually very, very important. That probably help us to understand some of the dramas, like what happened to Hu Jintao, right? And after that episode, that I got a lot of phone calls. I was traveling in Taipei and in Hong Kong and Singapore, and they asked me to comment on Hu, but I always ask which Hu. The 2 Hus are very, very important. But of course, most people ask about the old Hu, Hu Jintao. Now, of course, I do not pretend I know what's going on. I think different people have every reason to read their body language differently. Of course, again, I do not have any privilege or advantage in interpreting. But several things I think we should be keeping in mind. First of all, if there's a leak, Hu Jintao and other people, they are delegates. They probably know that some of the stories, particularly, Li Keqiang and Wang Yang will be out. So that should not bother him too much. Should not use that occasion to protest, right? Now, Hu Chenhua, of course, he is in the Central Committee because the election for the Power Bureau, so-called election, will happen the following day. So that should not be in that documents, right? I mean, so why you fight for? Of course, he's unhappy, and his son is a delegate, tried very hard to get a seat in the alternate membership, but did not make it. But he should know that a long time ago, because Xi Jinping said repeatedly, he thinks that the Tuanpai and the Princeling should not have any advantage to get in. So if this analysis is true, I do not know whether it's true or not, but this is my analysis. So I have difficult to interpret, right? Now, Chinese official media said that he is sick. Now, they did not say whether it's mentally sick or physically sick, right? You also have a good reason to discredit that kind of interpretation. So my view is we should wait. Because there's almost 2,500 delegates, people in that room. They should have similar documents as senior leaders have for that occasion. And they have the longer term observation about these things. So I think that this story certainly is a huge PR failure for Xi Jinping and the leadership. I don't buy the argument that Xi Jinping staged that whole thing. I mean, this cost is overwhelming, right? I also have the, difficult to believe that they're really fighting for materials. I mean this is kind of silly that the materials are fighting for these top 3 or 4 people. So still a mystery to me, but I think we will soon have the explanation. Of course, more importantly, of course, he will not be happy because so-called Tuanpai, the leaders advance their career from Chinese Communist Youth League officials rank. I have a strict definition. Actually, Wikipedia used my definition and Tuanpai because this word has become English language, very much like Guanxi or what's called Gong Fu or Hongbao or Ketou or whatever. So I really very happy. This is things I will be very proud that I contributed one English word, Tuanpai. But that's about 30 years ago. Someone sent me by Wikipedia definition that attributed Cheng Li's writings 30 years ago. So I certainly Xi Jinping, one of the most important things about this party Congress, Xi Jinping profoundly changed, replaced the previous called collective leadership, or what I used to call one party, 2 coalitions. The 2 coalitions, one coalition is led by Jiang Zemin, in which Xi Jinping himself was a member, largely from Shanghai, Princeling, from elitist group, coast region. The other is coalition led by Hu Jintao, usually come from the humble family background, especially from the Chinese Communist Youth League. I have a strict definition with Youth League officials, 团派, because they were the senior leaders in the provincial level or ministerial level. Youth League officials work under the leadership of Hu Jintao and Li Keqiang. Now, these are two coalitions sharing power for 20 years during post-Deng Xiaoping era. This is called collective leadership. Now, Xi Jinping's first term, he actually ran the country largely through his political allies, people associated with Jiang Zemin's faction, noticeably Wang Qishan, the anti-corruption czar, right, along with some other people. And he also had to work with two 团派 leaders, including Li Keqiang and Liu Yongsan. This first term, he did not his own protege at all. The second term, he started to promote two of his proteges, Li Zhansu and Zhao Leji, to the standing committee, 7 people standing committee. Then he also, have the two allies, both from Shanghai, part of the Shanghai Mafia and Jiang Zemin, right? It's Wang Funing and Han Zheng. But also same time, he had to accept or work with two 团派 leaders, namely Li Keqiang and Wang Yang. So that's the second term. Now the third term, there's no 团派 at all. Not only in Power Bureau Standing Committee, but even in 24 people Power Bureau. That's a remarkable change in the Chinese political, elite politics. And then 5 out of 6 people are his proteges. Work for him for 30 or 40 years. The shortest is 15 years, Ding Xuexiang. Other people really 30 or 40 years serve as his 秘书, right? So people said the yes man and etc. Now, only one person ally is the person who wrote about the new authoritarianism, his like-minded ally, Wang Funing. So that's his dominated power. And so that's the profound change in terms of leadership lineup. Now, of course, he used that what happened 10 years ago. Now, what happened 10 years ago? Remember, Bo Xilai, Lin Jihua, Zhou Yongkang, scandals one after another. Actually, that time I thought that the Communist Party is in big trouble, right? The corruption is so widely spread. The railroad ministry, Liu Zijun, he actually, in his verdict, they say that they found that he owned 375 villas run by, was a Marriott, expensive villas. Now, people like you will wonder why you need to have so many villas, 370. But for people who know about that guy, he has, first of all, he has a nickname called Mr. 4%. In every railroad deal, fast train, he got 4%. But more importantly, he is a womanizer. Maybe it's the word, it's a little bit too kind to him. He basically slept with women, and he would generously give one woman who slept with one villa. 370 villas. So the Communist Party has become so notorious at that time. So Xi Jinping wanted to use that opportunity, rise to the occasion. And so he started anti-corruption and poverty elimination, military reform, and particularly all these things together to try to save the Chinese Communist Party and put it back. Now, let me give a footnote. 10 years ago, very few young people interested in joining the Chinese Communist Party because it's so corrupted. You have different channels, study abroad, come to Johns Hopkins, work for Alibaba, and etc. No point joining the Communist Party. But 10 years later, particularly new recruitment over the past few years, his second term, targeting college students. I was surprised to find that so many college students in China's top universities are Communist Party members. I don't mean that they necessarily believe in communism, but at least they think the Communist Party will not be gone in the near future. So that's tell you, even there's some tensions difficult for college graduates, but not the top tier schools. Difficult for the second or third tier schools students find a job. But the nationalism play a very, very important role among the young people. So that's the background. That's why he can succeed. Why he claimed the previous kind of collective leadership is related with the fragmentation, related with the vicious power struggle, related with the order could not go beyond the Zhongnanhai, related with military leader disobey civilian leadership. All the problems become his justification for strongman politics. And also, more importantly, in today's environment, unfortunately, our democracy, Western democracy, are not in good shape. Right? So he believes that China should have its own development model, political system, emphasize on stability and national security.
Can I just jump?
Please.
Can I just jump on that last point? It's not one of my prepared questions, but
Please.
it's something that the theme on the failure of collective leadership prior to Xi's ascension of power. And I'm also reminded of a talk that Susan Shirk gave here a couple weeks ago. She identified something that was, that I think certainly people like me who really started my own career proper around that time of the late 90s and then into the early aughts. I mean, that was a period of real opening.
Yeah.
And something that has, it's basically been kind of closing off. I think David Shambaugh mentioned that at one of the events that we were together that it was, the Fang Shou cycle, except the show had been going on for 14 years now. And do you think that that openness at the time, is that perceived as a symptom of what was going wrong in terms of the leadership dynamics at the time? Or is it something that was kind of coincidental to it? And the reason I ask quite simply is that if it's the former, then we're less likely to go back to that type of environment anytime soon.
No, I think that period, particularly later 1980, middle 1980s, is before Tiananmen, and also a few years after Tiananmen. Actually, I happened to be in China in both periods. I benefited from the Deng Xiaoping's economic reform that I described, that I was really in college at the time, early 1980s. This is the most open, liberal time in China's educational system. And also, I'm lucky enough sent by Dr. Burnett's foundation to China from 1993 to 1995. This is also a period to start to witness the emergence of a middle class. So these are good periods. Now, the problem is that the later on, particularly in 2012, that period, there's something that you can say this is a progress, that Bo Xilai and Wang Yang started a political campaign, to sell their own model, Guangdong model and the Chongqing model, right? But some people getting nervous. Of course, their real objective is to get a seat at the Power Bill Standing Committee, especially for Bo Xilai, but also for Wang Yang. So some people think that this is kind of Western-style campaign. I mean, it's really quite unusual in the Chinese context, right? And also some of the leaders like Li Yuanzhao and Wang Yang also push for political reform and the intra-party democracy and etc. So that's actually, I'm certainly for that. I edited a book by Yu Keping, talk about democracy is a good thing and all these things. But we need to put in the context, after 2012, there are several things changed. One is that China's economic disparity become an issue. It's not so much about corruption. Corruption start to fix, but the economic disparity, because the gigantic IT companies like Alibaba and Tencent, the huge real estate companies, etc., really boom in the country. Now, I remember that just a couple of years ago when Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, had the moon, called the space ride, right? This 50,000 Americans signed a petition, asked him to not come back to Earth after the trip. Then I gave a talk, a Zoom talk, this is last year, for actually business leader elites in China, about 50 of them. But when I mentioned that one, I got the two chat, comments. They said, I can say that if it had happened in China, Jack Ma or Robin Lee, had that kind of a trip, it's not just 50,000, maybe 100 times, 1,000 times more people will sign that petition. No, I cannot verify, but this is from business elites. Don't forget. So you can say it's going to hate for super rich people. Now, from Chinese leadership mind, they think that the things went wrong in Hong Kong, in Chile, more recently, in Paris, in the United States. Of course, there are many factors, but one of them is the shrinking of the middle class or economic disparity in these societies, right, which is a stabilizing force. So they think China could not do that. Actually, I wrote an article after I saw the movie Joker and also was the Paradise, the Korean movie, talk about these two films, one South Korea, one US movie, they all have the same theme. It's this kind of marginalized that the low middle class causes huge economic problem. Then following day, it's no man's land. It's a similar topic in that regard. So that's actually reveal some of the fundamental problems in these democratic societies, disparity. And people become super rich. These are Wall Street people, whatever. So I think that article got attention because I almost immediately published, got some attention according to some of the officials told me, that some comments. So that explains their mindset. This is one thing. Secondly, it's more recent years, probably, first of all, U.S. strategy towards China, even under Obama administration, already talk about pivotal to Asia. This is largely because of China's ever-growing power, right? But of course, Obama still want to engage with China. Under his leadership, like 100,000 education exchanges still going on. Hillary Clinton pushed for that kind of thing. It's not a containment, but there's some worry, some fear about China's ever-growing influence. That's why the pivotal power come from. Now, but the recent years, especially under Donald Trump, especially his final year, you can see U.S.-China relations deteriorate to the degree that beyond anyone's imagination. Just look at the recent 3 years, that not only both sides accuse each other as a genocide regime and speculate that COVID, the virus was really created in each other's lab. There's still some people believe that in both countries. And also the tensions in terms of military in South China Sea, East China Sea, especially Taiwan Strait, is on the rise, right? So with all these things, that the international environment profoundly changed, plus recent Ukraine war. So all these things make the Chinese leadership, especially Xi Jinping, in the past 2 or 3 years, maybe even longer, he created a term called profound changes unseen in a century, 前所未有, in a century, which means that you face a very hostile environment. So with domestic situation, disparity, with international environment conducive, he's changed. So I do not buy the argument that Xi Jinping is an anti-US person. I can share you a lot of stories. One of them is that the fact that he sent his daughter to study at Harvard. Both of us went to Harvard for that conference. It shows that if he's really hate U.S., prepared to have a confrontational policy with the United States, what's the point sending your daughter to study U.S., right? Now, but of course, he changed along the way. And actually, this morning we had a conference that my colleague Jonathan Pollock actually mentioned. Early on, Xi Jinping was very tough on North Korea. He think that country hijacked China's foreign policy. But later he changed all these things. So what I'm talking about, just like even COVID things, previously they called Li Wenliang, the medical doctor, whistleblower, as a kind of a criminal, but later changed to the verdict as a hero. Of course, they do not want to say too much about him. But all these things show there's some adaptability or the environment forced him to do. So go back to that point. I think 1990s, middle 1990s is good years, good period. 10 years early is also a good period. But unfortunately, now we're in a very difficult situation. especially the political control, media censorship, personality cut. These are all things that you and I probably think is distasteful. But we do need to find the reason. It's beyond just individuals' ambition or ego. Look at the domestic and international environment. Now, to a certain extent, the common prosperity, we should not misunderstand that. It may not be a entirely bad idea, because you wanted to make more people join the middle income rank or middle class. That's a very, very legitimate concern, right? Now, of course, at the moment, they're not doing well, partly because draconian nature of a COVID lockdown, partly because they actually intended, or probably I think we'll say unintendedly, hit the small business. Of course, these gigantic companies like Alibaba and Tencent also hit the small business because of monopoly. So that small business, private sector, 小微企业 is really in trouble. I think the new leadership should really address that problem. But I do not see that it will return to the period let Alibaba, let Tencent, like super rich people continue to rich. Now, of course, some people think that you cannot do that. But look at ourselves, United States. Senator Elizabeth Warren just sent a letter talking we should control the super rich, this IT platform, to dominate the market. This hurt American working class, American middle class. So in that regard, it's similar. So that's the background to answer your excellent question. And certainly, I'm very nostalgic about the 1990s and about 1980s. But let's face it, there's some important things change the environment. And the question is whether this current situation is temporary. I do believe there's a tension between the very dynamic society and this kind of rigid political system. But I do not know how that will unfold because it depends on so many things. But if we are the era of the war scenario, everything is relative. You and I study politics. We have some political scientist professor here. I mean, we have the term called high politics and low politics. High politics refer to survival of a state, without which nothing is important, right? The low politics refer to economics. So that's not a Chinese, uniquely Chinese. And put security and politics ahead of economy. Come on, it's not so strange for us. Look at so many countries, especially major powers. We're all doing this kind of things.
Thank you. I mean, that's a fascinating answer, and I think an important lesson for us to think comparatively. It's something that's fallen out of fashion, and I think it's something that does good all around. I have two more questions. I mean, I have more than two more, but I will just ask two more and then open up the floor. The first, I'm going to take them out of order. So let me ask the structural one first. So one of the things that, for me as a student of bureaucratic politics, just fascinating about the Xi Jinping era so far is just the construction of these entirely new institutions and the building of all of these new leading groups and commissions and the like. When people talk to me and they say how Maoist Xi is, I'm thinking that, well, the opposite is true, actually. He's creating these institutions rather than tearing them down. Maybe he's putting them into competition, maybe with existing ones. But so I guess one question is, do you anticipate kind of more of the same? Like what might you, if you peer into your crystal ball, kind of what would kind of forward-looking institutional change look like? And then as a sub-part of that question, one of the things that he's done in recent years, and I'd love to hear more comments and insight from you on that, is his finally being able to secure kind of compliance and loyalty from the coercive apparatus writ large.
Well, yes, this is very much in line with the total national security and social stability in the first. And this is the first time that intelligence czar, Chen Wenqing, his longtime friend, promoted to be a Politburo member. This is never happened before in the past 40 years. Things that ministry is established, Ministry of called National Security, right? That tell you the emphasis, and also that actually rumor said that his police chief now will become the director of general office of the CCP. Although it's not announced yet, but sounds like this is the only position he will take among the secretary. So again, yet to see. So these are all these things to reflect that the tight control and national security emphasis, and et cetera. But at the same time, that the Xi Jinping sometimes still need to work with the system, not completely change. Early on, he established a leading group because he has trouble, he has some resistance. Actually, interesting enough that he did not control the police until just a couple of years ago. Remember that the police chief was arrested just a couple of years ago or 2 years ago. Then the Shanghai vice mayor, former vice minister of police, all recently arrested. So that tells you that his process of consolidating power is in a gradual process. Even that he was a powerful man, even when he became the power, but that's, you see the process. He has certainly seemed to me, has a great sense of timing, when to move, how to move, right? Really, a lot of people underestimate him. Now, but the thing is that this time, the major attention about his successor. Now, I always believe that he need to address the tension. On the one hand, you need to promote so-called sixth generation. The definition of sixth generation is very easy. Anyone born 1960s called sixth generation, born 1970s, seventh generation, 50s, fifth generation. It's different from the time when that's the eighth generation. It's more complicated, right? But this is 70后、50后、60后. He needs to promote those born in 1960 or born 1959 called 准60后, to that Power Standing Committee. But at the same time, he does not want to have people to identify a successor. The tricky thing is, if you only promote one younger leader to the Power Standing Committee, the following day will say this is a successor. If you two, one you will be the party, one will be the state, right? Like Li Keqiang or now Li Qiang, etc. Right. So I thought that he probably will promote 3. I also predict that that's actually correct, that 4 new leaders will enter the Power Standing Committee. That's why I believe Wang Yang and Li Keqiang will be gone, because people need to pave the way for that kind of things. Now, but I did not realize, actually I thought this whole thing almost for a year. But then it's shocking. First of all, no one now talk about Xi Jinping's successor, right? Now it's already 3 weeks after the party congress, or maybe 4 weeks, right? That's, in that regard, Xi Jinping achieved that. But he did put 2 people in the Power Standing Committee. But the tricky thing is he put them both in the State Council as premier and executive vice premier. So it really confused people. Now, there may be a benign reason he put the people rotate in different positions, let them to accept, gain more experience, get accepted by public. But also, you can say he will completely delay that process. Maybe he will choose the successor from Power Bureau. But the pressure for him is overwhelming, despite he delayed that process. Of course, he does not want to be lame duck for his 3rd term. I do believe that he plans to have his 4th term. That's his plan. That's why he wants to delay, identify a successor. But at the same time, the generational change, except a few exceptions, are actually moving forward. It's in progress. Among these 376 people, only 3 people are over age, meaning they're born 1955. In past 20 years, there's a strict line, 1940, 1945, 1950, this time 1955. But 376 people, only 3. One is Xi Jinping himself. The other is the top diplomat, Wang Yi. The other is the vice chairman of CMC, Zhang Youxia. Certainly, you can see Xi Jinping justify that we need a person in charge of Taiwan affairs. We need a person to continue the foreign affairs things, right? So this kind of thing. But also, it's very important, the Power Bureau, more than half of them are born in 1960s, 60后. So you already see this kind of preparation. And you look at Central Committee, 376 people. Among them, the 205 are 4 members. Of 4 members are much better than the alternate members. Among these 205, no 7G leader, 0. 0 in the 205. That's remarkable. Then you look at the alternate members. There are some 7Gs. You can say probably maybe 10% or maybe more. But the 0 born 1980s. Except that one person's age is not identified. Maybe that person is 1980, I do not know. But so far, I cannot find that person's age. So I can say that it's almost a zero, maybe zero. So that means that you cannot drop one generation, drop the 6 generations and look at their success in the 7th generation because they are not really far away to go. There's a strong resistance will be overwhelming. Now, Xi Jinping defeated the 2 factions, Princelings and Pan Pai. But a new faction will start to emerge. Actually, science already indicate that the Zhejiang gang, his power base, there's some spirit, there's some infightings. So you will see more dynamic in the years to come. And we should not forget that Xi Jinping was a member of the Jiang Zemin's coalition. Then he gradually moved out of shadow. This is the nature of Chinese politics. We should not underestimate all these yes men. These are actually quite capable leaders. Some people made fun of the standing committee, their educational background, their 工农兵学员, called the worker, peasant, soldier, and student. Sounds like a very mediocre the Cultural Revolution. Just you mentioned about barefoot doctor, but by the way, actually, I was not a barefoot doctor. I had shoes. I actually attended school. Barefoot doctor is a 3 months training. I got a 3 years training, much better. No, I'm sorry, but that's a fact. And the barefoot doctor, only 3 months training. I got 3 years medical training. Certainly not sufficient, but that's the story. But also people made fun of them. These people went to normal schools, the teacher school. I happened to also attend teacher school in China. But that's not fair to these people because these people advance their careers. Sometimes they got a good degree in the postgraduate and etc. Some people are street smart. But even that's the case, you can criticize them. Then you look at the Politburo. Wow, there's so many Western educated people. Like Cheng Li, new Shanghai party boss, spent 10 years in UK, in London, including 6 years attending PhD program and also postdoc in Imperial College, one of the best schools in United Kingdom. There are also several internationally renowned scientists, nuclear scientists, and AI scientists, life science scientists in the Politburo and also in Central Committee. Never before there's so many university presidents or party secretaries serve in the Central Committee. So you cannot say Xi Jinping used these kind of mediocre people because the next level, Politburo, at least the Politburo and the Central Committee is completely different. Now this is the way to tell you that some of the restraints, I'm sorry, I'm too long, and in terms of institutional norms and rules, regulation, Xi Jinping certainly manipulate that system, but to a certain extent, politicians always want to manipulate, but at the same time, there's still some strengths. Some you can abolish, some will remain, some will come back later on in different period. So that's the dynamic I want to share. But certainly, sadly, that our media certainly portray in a very simplistic way and not look at the complexities, some of the different layers and the paradoxical nature of the Chinese elite politics. Of course, I have been criticized about the monopolize of power, and I certainly think the winner takes all has a huge cost. The politics will become more vicious. But we should not fantasize the so-called collective leadership. When I wrote about the one-party, two coalition, when I wrote this book, people are so cynical about my work. They never believe that there's such a thing as check and balance in the Chinese political system. But when Xi Jinping abolished term limits, people start talking about how great the previous system was. Do we really buy that kind of assessment of how Chinese will look at the whole thing? So that's what I feel also quite ironic when you look at the whole this business about Chinese elite politics.
Well, no, and I think that's another important corrective, to look at things not just through this kind of singular lens and look at all the complexities. And in fact, your response brought me right to kind of the last question that I wanted to ask before I opened up the floor to Q&A, and that is, you started talking about, when you were talking about various demographics and age cohorts, you were starting to talk about norms, and the norm. We could talk all day about the which norms were broken, which norms were upheld, which norms were infirmed. But the ones that were of particular interest to me were the age norms, and not necessarily at the very, very top of the system, but kind of at mid-level of people kind of working their ways up the system. So, maybe the seventh generation or the eighth generation. That so on the one hand, if you buy the argument that the reasons why one-party systems can be more stable is that people coming in on the front end kind of work their way all the way up to the top. They have this kind of essentially this contract that the system will reward them, if they do their time. That, if you start messing around with the norms, people at kind of midway through, that's a dangerous place, a dangerous thing to attempt. And then the other thing is, and Jeremy Wall, I just came from a CSIS thing last week with Jeremy Wallace's new book. One of the things that he's looking at is this idea of kind of a movement away from the quantification of measurements for people at that mid around the system, but particularly people working their way up the system. And if you take away the quantification, or if you somehow bring in a new set of priorities and essentially incentivize and de-incentivize in ways that do not match up with what had been the case, since they joined the system in the first place. Is that not an area, or how do you see kind of the prospects for stability and instability away from the elite level, but people kind of who are planning to join those ranks, in a generation or so?
Well, this is a very, very important question. Certainly, Chinese has been obsessed with age because they think that the age limits or term limits is a fair game for everyone. That was reinforced in the past 20-some years, before Xi Jinping, and even in Xi Jinping's first term and second term. But this time, that certainly you see three exceptions, but three are very important exceptions. Right? But at the local level, ministry level, county level, prefecture level, municipal level, they all largely apply. But the question is that the three people, they all born, the previous parties, Power Standing Committee, Li Keqiang, Wang Yang, and Wang Funing, they all born in 1955. Why you should ask two people leave, one person stay? What's the justification, right? So this created tension and even animosity. So I still do not know how Xi Jinping resolved that problem. Now, this could be numerous ways. One is some justification like Zhang Youxia and Wang Yi because they are field. And also because kind of from deal making, cut a deal, or some kind of cohesive things, right? I still do not know why Hu Zhenhua could not make even the Power Bureau that seat. That's a big surprise to me. There must be some reason we will hear. Right. Now, of course, you can interpret it probably also reasonably well, is that Xi Jinping did not want to give any chance for anyone because he knows the politics could be very, very ugly. That it's a nature of the game, right? He has a different understanding, right? So I do not know all these things, but it does create potential problems. And etc. But I think that he conducted that in numerous ways. But most important, probably the high-level leadership, they reached some kind of consensus at this critical moment in China's history. We should overcome our ego. Maybe Xi Jinping also show that kind of flexibility in the future. I do not know at this moment, but I just want to emphasize the pressure on him at the moment might be not strong, but later on when the succession process going on, he still wants to stay forever. I don't think that will happen because Chinese system has its own dynamics, has its own logic. And as I said, the factional politics already, a new faction will start and the new dynamic will start. So I'm not deeply worried about this. There will be some kind of restraint and correction kind of mechanism, but at the moment, I'm more worried about the winner-take-all, the vicious power politics come back. I think that's a huge loss. But at the same time, I understand the rationale, the logic behind whether it's right or wrong is a different matter. Each of us has our own values. And I'm not a big fan of authoritarianism. But at the same time, I'm certainly humble enough to recognize democracy has some also problems. Some of the problem even cross authoritarianism and democracy and etc. So I think this is the moment for you guys, young people, to study politics, to find out what's the political system that will sound well, how we be open-minded enough to look at the different experiments, therefore, to improve our system, to make American democracy strong. It's the most important thing, just right point finger. Because it's so weak, some of our criticism, right? I mean, particularly we worry there's a new term also occur. I don't know whether you heard or not, called the Cold Civil War. This refers to what happened in the United States, particularly 2024, right? So that certainly gave ammunition for some of the hardliners in China. And so we live in a global environment. So anything that we do, we succeed, we fail, will have impact for other countries to do. At the moment, sadly, that China moves to that direction. But at the same time, I think that the societal dynamic, I think that we will see that will play an important role. At the moment, they suppress civil society, but eventually, with middle class expansion, it's a natural process, will restrain. And when I wrote to the middle class in Shanghai just last year, I argue that our policymakers in the United States should not, jump to a conclusion, think that the middle class only support the communist regime. I think then what surprised me in the Shanghai lockdown, middle class become a driving force to critical of the governance issues. So that really, in many ways, inspired me. But at the same time, we should also realize the middle class, the Chinese are also quite nationalistic. They have every reason to love their own country. So when United States want to put China down, want to treat the Chinese, every Chinese, Communist Party could not come to the United States. You want to overthrow the Communist Party. Sounds like it's so easy to do that without look at the ramification. So therefore, the young people and the middle class even support the Communist Party. There's a reason. Sometimes our policymakers' stupidity really reinforce, give the gift, give ammunition for the Chinese Communist Party.
And I think without editorializing too much, I think it seems to be the gift that keeps on giving. So why don't we let me move to the audience. I will give up my microphone, but before I do, and sorry, Lexi, I want to ask everybody to please keep your questions. There's a lot of you, and I want to get to as many of you as I possibly can. Please identify who you are and keep your questions as short and punchy, not punchy, but short as possible.
Good.
So.
You pick.
May I, as I'm holding the mic? Perks of the job. Just a quick moment. Thank you again for giving the speech. Lexi Jaramillo, I work under Professor Murtha. You mentioned the factions. I'm going to keep this brief. Do you see them as becoming competing to who can be more aggressive towards Xi Jinping's policies? Or do you think one will pull back and become more of a moderate option?
That's a good question. I start to think about that, but I do not have an answer based on current data. It will take some time, but at the moment I can share with you is the Zhejiang faction, very, very powerful group, split. There's some evidence for that. But how they will continue to grow, you can imagine those younger leaders, they will build up their network. And also that the educational difference, that whether you are 工农兵学院 worker person student, and then the very well-educated, top-notch rock scientists and etc., whether be tension or not, that's interesting. And also some of the leaders are actually advocates of the small business or market economy. Not like someone said after Liu He's departure, there's no such a leader. This is because of our ignorance. There's some people, many of them work along the coastal region, Zhejiang, Fujian, Zhejiang, Guangdong. These are very heavy marketplace. These are leaders serve as a governor, party secretary for a long time. They are very well experienced. But at the same time, there's a lot of people I call the Cosmos Club from airspace. They are also moving to the center. They have different background. They usually serve as a CEO or commander-in-chief of China's manned space program and the missile launch program, Shenzhou 5号, 6号, etc. They work in that area for 30 years. These are global Fortune 500 companies, certainly reflect Xi Jinping's industrial policy, state monopoly, and etc. So whether there will be tension or not. So it's still far too early to figure out. So I feel uncomfortable But it's an excellent question. It's a question we should observe. So you have the essence that the factional policy always exists. That's precisely that, I agree. And I think that we have some evidence, but it's a little bit too early, which faction, how they emerge, whether we challenge Xi Jinping. I think it will take for a while, a few years at least, right? And but Xi Jinping at the moment enjoys tremendous, authority and power. And but the thing is that his worst enemy is himself. He needs to resolve some of the challenges: Ukraine war, COVID, and the slowdown of the economy. These Taiwan issues. These are so tough, right? It's not easy, right? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Li. My name is Z. Joran Li. I'm always been a fan of your work. I am Professor Emeritus PhD student. I have so many questions, but I'll just choose one. Which the question I'll choose is about Tuanpai you were mentioning earlier. So what is actually, can you give us like a rather precise definition for Tuanpai? Because I've seen the list. For example, I've seen people like Li Zhanshu or Han Zheng who are served in like Tuanpai, but who served in Tuanpai, but also closely associated with Xi Jinping. And also after Xi Jinping's purge of Tuanpai, does Tuanpai still serve as a career fast track in current bureaucratic politics, or that function of Tuanpai has been done? Thank you.
You have two questions. Both are excellent. For the first question, my book has a strict definition. You should be a provincial level, or you're a member of the Central Committee of Chinese Communist Youth League under Li Keqiang and Hu Jintao, Li Keqiang, and Hu Chunhua. So that's the definition. Now, then also you should exclude people advance their career attributed to some other factors, right? Like Li Zhanshu, he's Tuanpai, like Han Zheng, also Tuanpai, because their promotion, like Li Yuancao, also actually it's a Communist Youth League, secretary in Shanghai, but his advance is largely from, Tuanpai, but some Han Zheng is from the Jiang Zemin's proteges. So that's two different things. Right? Even Li Yuancao is a princeling, but usually he is more associated with Tuanpai in Shanghai that they create without Hu Jintao, without Li Yuancao. So this you should go to individual cases to check. I have the list of exclusion and etc. This is a good question. For your second question, no, in the near future, Tuanpai is dismantled basically, right? And but on the other hand, Tuanpai has its age advantage. You look at the probably 1990s, 90后 and the 00后, that still this is a way to move. Whether we come back or not, we do not know. And but at the moment, there's no sign at all because the build affection needs a lot of factors involved. It's not so easy. So I think that Xi Jinping already successfully dismantled the various levels of Tuanpai leaders. So the Tuanpai leaders in the Central Committee from '96 in the in the 17th Party Congress to now only about 20 in the Central Committee. So from 23% to now like 5%. So it's insignificant at the moment. There are some people still survive, like Zhou Qiang in the chief president of the Supreme Court, like Lu Hao, also a Tuanpai leader, protege of Li Yuancao. They still survive, but these are trivial. It's insignificant.
I just want to follow up if I can. We only have one mic between us up here before we get to... No, but the Communist Youth League, you still see it as a way for people to overcome the impediments of going up through the ranks through promotion and being able to beat the age game, because if they stay at the Tuanpai allows them to essentially shorten a 5-year term somewhere to 3 years, or to begin either earlier or to start their career at a higher starting point. I know we're getting into the weeds here, but I'm curious about to what degree you would see that as essentially no longer being as desirable a route to essentially thread the needle of getting up to to being able to be considered for national level office.
Yeah. So again, it's based on my previous definition. You should be provincial level, ministry level, Tanpai officials. So in that level, it's largely freeze. But the low level, the county level or whatever, you do still see that people get faster. But also, these people have multiple identities. They probably have more to do with Tsinghua University. It's a very powerful network rather than with Tanpai. And also, we do not know what's the next. And so I think that's unclear. So if you were in China, that I would not suggest to choose that career, and it's very, very tough. Probably the other careers, probably go to become a CEO or CEO's assistant. It's much better, and the state-owned enterprises. And also Xi Jinping's anti-private sector also block the potential people like Jack Ma and etc. So that's the game. But I can only foresee for the next 10 to 15 years. I cannot go beyond that. Could be completely different, the situation. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Li. My name is Sheldon. I'm second-year master's student at Elliott School of International Affairs. So my question is really is about the future projection of the China's future. Because you have seen after the Party Congress, the Xi Jinping leads all the standing committee members to the Yan'an, and they were emphasizing the spirit of struggles, and also in economics domain, they were a lot of supply and marketing and the supply cooperates, Gongqiao has been emerging. So that seems like all the kind of direction of the China has been more leftist or more back to the Mao's era. So what do you think your articulation of the China's future, it is more the end of the reform and opening era is gonna end, or it is we're stepping into a new era? Thank you.
It's a good question. It's a question in many people, the mind, including a lot of Chinese elites. In the conference I attended at Harvard, and there's some Chinese scholars came, and also I constantly in exchange through Zoom and also through other meetings when I visit Southeast Asia and East Asia. I think this widely spread concern and fear among Chinese elites. But I think to answer your question, I think it's all related with the degree. We should not go extreme to talk about we go back to Mao era. That's impossible. That's impossible. I grew up in that era. And that era is the Red Terror. It's everywhere. Everything you feel, you think you're wrong, and everything, Mao was right. But for God's sake, how many people think they are wrong, Xi was right? No. There's no such kind of sentiment. The environment change. This I talk about the societal change, and a lot of criticism is that some people tend to go extreme. I think that fundamentally that I do not see any chance you abolish property rights, but in the Mao era there's no property rights. So, but with the 400 or 500 million middle class, they all think that the property rights are so crucial. So there's no any kind of a move to want to change that in the China Party Constitution. I think it's a fair statement, right? So that tells you to say the narrative go back to Cultural Revolution is highly exaggerated. The environment change. But on the other hand, of course, Xi Jinping is a very symbolic. When he talks about Cuxing, Cuxing is related to the original. The original is the communist movement to try to help poor people. But ironically, during the past 20-some years in the economic reform, you have the super corrupted people with power. So this is very much, like some other countries that completely change their original objective. So it's not just communists, but these corrupt capitalists dominate things. They are also Communist Party members, their families, their principles. So that's the things Xi Jinping wanted to target, although he is part of that. But what's remarkable, he cut off. After he used Princeling to defeat the Tuanpai, he kept a distance from Princeling. Right. That's a remarkable move, largely in his second term. And his relationship with Wang Qishan also changed. But this right move. But on the other hand, you can see that even from day one, he talked about Chinese dream. talk about poverty elimination. That's his policy focus. That has been consistent, not changed. So how you read it is very, very important. We should really give the right degree, right analysis. Do not go extreme. Talk about, oh, he's wonderful. I mean, this is still market-orientated. I mean, we do not have too much evidence about the market-orientated. But we should not go to extreme. He will go back to the complete communist system. That's not true. Even reject the market reform is not true. But it's as I mentioned this morning at the Brookings event, we should better understand the common prosperity. Because as Yuan Jiajun, the also New Power Bureau member, he said that the common prosperity, the key is prosperity, not common. Right. Now, also the prosperity that will make more people move that rank. So let's see whether they can achieve or not. If it's achieved, that will have a very strong impact for the three engines of China's economy. None of them is doing well at the moment. Consumption, investment, foreign trade. But if middle class expand, they will give the opportunity for all these three development: consumption, investment, and also foreign trade. But more importantly, I think I am a strong believer that middle class also can contribute to global peace. Because I mean, I still kind of old-fashioned, right? So if there's more middle class than developed in many countries, will profoundly change the war and the peace that's dynamic. The problem is that the middle class is shrinking in many countries. That causes a lot of anxiety and tensions, and also make politicians sometimes go extreme. So I think China is not the exception. So it is a test. They wanted to use different methods. To a certain extent, look at the United States. Donald Trump, I mean, despite many people probably here do not like him, but he actually put the middle class as his make America great again. It's the tax incentive for middle class. That's the reason, part of the reason he probably got elected in the first place. Same things with Biden. Remember the foreign policy for middle class from Carnegie, from many other people. I mean, these are the platform. But the trouble is we do not see so much concrete result at the moment. It's very difficult to destroy the vested interest group. You can imagine it's also very difficult to undermine the strong interest group in China. I mean, basically, three groups of people do not like Xi Jinping. Liberal intellectuals, business leaders, of course you undermine their interest. And to a certain extent, officials. Officials, they grew up during the not Mao era, grew up during the Deng era. So you ask them, which leader you like more, Deng or Mao? I think it's easy. The answer is easy. Deng. Now also they have some other grievance because of institutional norm. Why it only happened to them? So of course, not to mention about corrupt officials. Of course, naturally they don't like Xi Jinping's anti-corruption. But even not corrupt officials have some reservations. But you have some critics. You do need to find what's Xi Jinping's power base. That's equally important. Otherwise, you cannot explain he will do these things. So the base is the ordinary people, huge. The base is the military. The base is the political establishment. His proteges, they are already dominant leadership. Why? So this is high-ranking things. These are all very, very important. Now, what happened in the past 4 years is, I observe, when Xi Jinping abolished term limits, there are more criticism among these three groups. But now, because of US policy towards China, actually, some of people change their views. I do not have the statistic. I cannot do the survey myself. But this is my sentiment. Even these three groups, they still wait and see how dynamic. But on the other hand, no country can develop under chaotic situation. So economic, political stability actually also is important. Do you really want to have a revolution? Like some of the countries, this disparity become out of control. Of course, business leaders say no, right? But they have a period to adjust that new environment. I understand there's frustration, but that's the essence of your question. I'm sorry I talked too long. So I want to reduce the answer times. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, good to see you. Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Li.
Yeah.
So good to see you
Sure.
after 3 years, after I finished my internship at Brookings. And thank you for coming here and giving this, brilliant talk. So, you are one of the earliest and best scholars to study. You are one of the best scholars to study. My name is Ifan. I'm a second-year PhD student here at SAIS with Professor Murtha. Sorry, always forgot to mention that. So, you are one of the best scholars to study technocracy in China, 技术官僚, right? So, and, I did some preliminary research on the Politburo and the Central Committee, and I noticed that there seems to be a trend in the increase of the portion of technocrats in, the new Central Committee and the Politburo. And I wonder what are the differences between the new cohort of this, technocrats from, those in the Jiang and Hu era, and, do you see more of the, loyalist characteristics in them, or are they forming this new faction as, what they call 军工系, like the military industry faction? So, just want to hear your thoughts on that.
I had an article, written 2 months ago. It's called Technocrats 2.0. Exactly answer your question. And also tomorrow I need to send the Wall Street Journal some of the charts they wanted to use and about the Technocrats 2.0. It's how Xi Jinping's technocrats differ from Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao era. There are a number of differences because Jiang Zemin's generation studied in former Soviet Union and East European countries. And the Hu Jintao generation usually study at home, domestically, Tsinghua and etc. Actually, I wrote my dissertation on technocrats. This is 30-some years ago. Now, this difference also that the previous technocrats just studied EE, civil engineering, in the water engineering, but the new technocrats study aerospace, life science, and AI, environment. And the previous technocrats, just, of course, the new technocrats also, there's a significant of them studied abroad, like Cheng Li I mentioned. Yuan Jiajun, I just mentioned, also studied in Germany for 2 years as a visiting scholar. Also, that the previous, technocrats served at the factory for a short period of time, like Jiang Zemin, like Li Peng, and etc. But the new technocrats, they had the gigantic global Fortune 500 companies. So it's very much global vision, global competition, right? So there's a long list of the differences in terms of educational background, etc. Now, one thing actually, Tuan Pai usually did not study engineering or sciences. They study about the law or politics or party affairs and or humanities, social sciences. So you see the technocrats and the decline, then rebound in Xi Jinping's last 5 years. So I have the charts just exactly like this. So these are the things that it's a good question. I think the technocrats' leadership will be very, very important to watch. And we face a very tough competition. Our political leaders, there are some good scientists, but not too many. Steve Chu, right, is the Nobel Prize, the cabinet member for the Obama. But then you look at the current cabinet, look at the Biden, Trump cabinets, very few. But now Chinese, the power bureaus, there are a lot of them, right? So you cannot say they are incompetent. You cannot say they are ignorant. So that's the areas we should see the future competition. And this is related with the rapid rise of China's aerospace industry, right? United States want to boycott and not allow Chinese participate in the International Space Station. Remember, that's 10 to 15 years ago. But now China established its own international aerospace. This is the area that Xi Jinping emphasized because this is the best way to enhance nationalist sentiment, to position himself as a global leader, right? And to compete with the United States. At the time, United States wanted to use chips and other technology issues to decouple with China. So that's also another important priority coming from the 20th Party Congress. It's the same as Customers Club. This is I use the Customers Club. I don't know. Probably I'm not the first one to use that, but I use that in that book, and also 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, they start to emerge, but now 3 of them enter the Power Bill Standing Committee. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Li. So I'm Zhenting. So I'm currently working with Dr. Li as an intern. So my question is about your perception on zero COVID policy. How Communist Party's objective and priorities on this policy? Because we saw a misalignment between zero COVID and economics back in Li Keqiang, and now they still stress on zero COVID, but we saw some maybe some signs for reopening, like the German premier visiting, or like Zheng Guang. So he former virus specialist, so he gives a speech on so how China may probably gradually go open. So I want to ask your perspective.
Good. Well, first of all, that I mean, both of you remind me that you know, my work is really got tremendous help. I'm so privileged to work with some of the best and the brightest, you know, best and brightest people in the country. You know, I got a lot too much credit, and including my research assistant Lucy. She is here. I mean, a tremendous benefit from your contribution, but I always feel guilty that I got too much credit for myself. But on the other hand, I think really that this reflects the teamwork. I think that I'm very confident your generation will do much better in the years to come. Now, your question, because I just got back from 3 weeks trip to Asia, Asia cities. This is always the first question and the last question, and cover. That's to a certain extent tell how important Chinese economy has become, and become domestic serious concern, become international concern for business company. Now, the fact that Xi Jinping appointed Li Qiang, a controversial figure of COVID, to be premier, send a very clear message. China's COVID policy is not a failure, but it's a astounding success. Now, given the fact that per capita, China's infection rate and the per capita death toll is the lowest in the world, you cannot criticize too much about the statement. But on the other hand, the panic, you know, about the COVID, the draconian nature, it's really quite something, right? I think that China still needs to learn a great deal, and about that international reaction, Chinese public reaction about this. Now, one thing that you see the contradiction actually already affect the market. The press conference a few days ago, you know, got some big surge, but then nothing happened. And but all these related facts that with the virus, with the variant, based on my information, that the Chinese leadership is preparing to open up, but it will be step by step. China will be one of the, you know, latest countries to open up. But on the other hand, China wants to do that more systematically, do not want to go back to lockdown and etc. They want to make sure 2 things. One is the whether there will be fatal variant this winter. Number 2, the serious disease, you know, the rate will be what it look like. Because China's hospital bed is double than United States, but the ICU bed is only 10% of United States, basically 3% of American. So it's not that sufficient. This is a serious challenge. I mean, now people just criticize the Chinese government draconian nature, but you open up, then the toll, then the ICU bed becomes shortage. Then it's different kind of challenge. Particularly Chinese culture, Chinese political system will deal with a big, very, you know, kind of overwhelming challenge. So that's their concern, that's their worry. But on the other hand, that the world has opened up. You know, I actually was in Taipei just 1 week before my trip. It's still kind of, you know, control. You know, I need to quarantine. But when I arrived, the quarantine abolished just 3 weeks ago. So if that trend continue, right, I think China will feel more comfortable. So I think at the moment they look at these things very, very carefully. Now, to a certain extent, they already start to open up, welcome foreigners back to back to China to study, to work, and etc. Then also you see the delegation, as you mentioned, one after another, right? And so that they, of course, they do not require the quarantine, right? The German delegation, Vietnam delegation, etc. Right? And also encouraging sign is that the German chancellor's visit also will Chinese allow some of the German residents to use vaccine. I think Pfizer or Moderna or German branch, whatever. So that's also encouraging sign. I think this will be part of discussion in the summit, in the G20 meeting between Xi Jinping and Biden. Highly likely that will happen. So I'm optimistic, but there's a condition. The condition is this winter. They will monitor very, very closely. You can say it's for health reason, you can say it's for political reason, but despite that the economic cost is so overwhelming, Chinese still want to continue that path. That tell you they are worried, they are fear. Now, of course, I do not make a point that these are fear or justified. In my view, they're wandering between overcapacity on the one hand, and overconfidence on the one hand, and excessive fear on the other hand. But it's tough call, right? But you see the narrative start to change. But that ultimate decision will not be in a press conference, but rather will be the new premier probably announce, to give him the opportunity to change his image and etc. So this is my reading and forecasting.
Well, just like COVID is the first and last question of your in every meeting you've had on your trip to Asia, I guess we're at 2:00, so we're at time.
Oh, okay.
It'll have to be our last question as well. Please join me in one more round of applause for.
Well, excellent questions. So honored to be here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good luck.